Hello, hello, Lesha. How are you doing today?
So well today. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And it's funny, before we hit record, you said like I assumed you were in Canada because our mutual acquaintance hooked us up, and I kind of assumed you were in Canada, but we're pretty close, right? You're in Utah.
Yep, Salt Lake City.
I love that. I love that. We'll have to get together soon in person, not just virtually.
Yeah. And I was born in Colorado too, is the funny thing.
Where were you born?
Inglewood, outside of Denver.
Oh, no way. That is so awesome. Small world. I love it. I love these connections. So,
Mhm.
before we dive into all of these topics that you have expertise in, I wanted to just have you give a brief intro of who you are and who you serve.
Sure. So, gosh, who am I? I started out as a occupational therapist, so really started out immersed in the medical field, in the medical world, working in the hospital, inpatient neuro rehab, transitioned over to pediatrics, um, and started learning what's called craniosacral therapy through an organization called the Upledger Institute. And that just took me down a whole new path of more holistic care, holistic services. Took a lot of training and education with them to the point where I opened up my own practice and stopped working in the hospital full time. And that's really more approaching the body with a holistic approach. And over the years have narrowed that down into more what I call womb work, working with newborns, infants, pregnancy, conception, um, and also interweaving in what I call nervous system work, helping the body regulate the nervous system, because that's really the basis of cranial sacral. So really combining the two together, nervous system regulation, womb healing, womb work into one.
Okay. And so, do you work primarily like only with women or?
Pretty much
Yeah.
in,
Okay.
like I had male clients, and then when COVID hit, I kind of really decreased my clientele to just women, just conception, pregnancy, newborns, postpartum. It's also about the time I moved half of my practice online to more distance coaching, distance sessions. I have a male client right now. I don't completely say no to men, but if I really resonate with them, uh, I will definitely still work with guys, but mostly women.
Yeah, I was just curious because that's a shift, especially with your background too.
Mhm.
Very cool. And I have so many selfish questions coming to mind as I call in my first pregnancy. Hopefully soon. It's been a while. I'm getting impatient. But I'd love to start with your expertise on the womb space. And maybe we could just start with when we talk about this, when we talk about womb healing or our womb space, can you give a little bit of background or almost like definition to that?
Sure. So technically, anatomically, the womb, or when I'm referring to the womb space, that's all parts of our anatomy. So ovaries, fallopian tubes, the womb itself. Within that, we have the cervix. Also, in my work, I mean, I'm just going to warn you, warn your audience. We're going to talk anatomical terms. Hopefully, they're not triggered by it. Cervix, vagina. I include the clitoris as well because that plays such a huge role and has a lot of nerve endings, and as well as like the outside that I just lovingly call the yoni, but technically in anatomical terms, it's like the labia minora, labia majora. So it's that whole anatomy. And I do get asked a lot if you've had your uterus removed or an ovary removed, if you're not actively bleeding, if you're an older woman. And even now, as we're moving more into transgender, these different types of things, anyone can do womb work. Like actually, men who don't even have a womb can also do a type of womb work in a sense. So um, it is like that whole anatomical area.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for clarifying. And I've just done my own. research and learning and finding meditations and videos and podcasts on womb healing as I've, like I mentioned, on this journey to call in our first baby. And it seems like there is everything from like womb healing can encompass essential oils and like self massage, yoni gazing, other yoni appreciation activities, and maybe even down to like teas and meditations and visualization. So when you work with a client through womb healing, what does that practice look like? Or does it kind of depend? Or what are some of your favorite tools? If you could give us a little more insight there.
So, an easy way to kind of think about a lot of different approaches is the five bodies of like physical, mental, emotional, energetic, and spiritual. So just the way life is currently, I'm diving into a lot of different nutritional pieces now at this point in my life and really starting to understand what a huge role our nutrition has on things like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. I'm 42, and so I'm not premenopausal, but I expect within the next 10 years I will be. And just really understanding, like, oh, wow, the nutrition I'm eating now, the balance I have with my estrogen now is going to play this huge role into my menopause and how well I make go through menopause. And so I don't really address that with per se per women. Like I might because I'm learning so much right now about this. But so I think of that as more of like the nutritional aspect or some more of like the physical aspect. If I have a woman in my office, I can do cranial sacral or I can start to work with some of the tissues. I'm not a pelvic floor therapist. That's someone else that might focus on the more physical aspects. So, kind of thinking about that, where I do a lot of work is more the emotional, the spiritual, and the energetic work. Um, and that can play a role into our mental states. We can't separate body mind, even though we have tried for thousands of years, we just can't. But I do more approach it from what's called a bottom up approach, from a body based perspective. And so, when I talk about more the spiritual component, it's like, what is your relationship to your womb? Are you connecting with it? Do you follow this can be more this can be more physical, but like, what's your relationship to your cycle, to your period? How do you treat your blood when you do have a cycle? What's your responses? Emotionally, what comes to mind when you think about your first period? What comes to mind when you think about if you've had children, birthing your children, and even I like to bring in our own births because we have that memory within us. And what's our ancestral connection? What's our connection to the spirit realm? All of this to me can be stored somatically, emotionally, spiritually, anywhere in the body. But I find with women and with womb work, our womb is a storehouse for emotions. Our womb is a storehouse for epigenetics. And this, to me, I can only speak from personal experience. It's when I started mentoring with a womb mentor and doing my own womb work and connecting with my womb, really for the first time, that's really when my life had a big shift, had a big change, and really allowed me to really trust my body at a whole new level, in a whole new way of understanding. As I cleared out some really big ancestral stories, some really deep traumas, like not being supported for my first period, having painful cycles, um, lots of medical exams as a teenager because of yeast infections, and like being put on birth control at 16, like all this is trauma that's stored in the body, and our body remembers that. And so all of that makes us disconnect from our womb. And so really working with women and clients of like, excuse me, how can we connect more with this part of our body that predicts so much of our life, like our cycle and our period, whether or not we're choosing to have children, our relationship to our children in utero and afterwards, or preconception, like in your space, calling in the baby. All of this is related. And that's how I approach it, is more the spiritual, energetic, emotional pieces.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up kind of trauma and how that can be stored in the body, because it sounds like somatic work is a lot of what you practice as well. And along those lines, one of the things I have read or heard as I've been studying more about the womb is that in regards to your yoni and your yoni lips, anytime you have said yes when you meant no, some of that like lack of trust is stored there, sexually, but also like not sexually in life, right? Anytime that your body has really been saying no, but you've gone ahead and said yes anyway. Is that something that you have like heard or read or believe in? And what are some ways to start rebuilding trust if there have been boundaries that maybe I think a lot of people in this audience and myself included have worked on healing people pleasing and
Yeah.
learning how to hold our boundaries and restore that trust in what we want. So how does healing that come into play?
Yeah, I love so much that you brought that up. So that school of thought, and again, I don't know where, like what you're reading or where you're getting this information. For me, I guide women through what's called the 7 gates of the womb. And so there's 7 points within the womb, and we start on the most, sorry. We start on the most outside of the womb, which is, like you said, the yoni lips. And within the yoni lips, the first gate or the first piece that we really journey through is trust. And I think it's important to say, like, just because you may have said yes, let's say to intercourse, when you really meant no, it might not be a trauma. And what makes it a trauma for me, and how I really like to look at this and how we store it in the body, is if it's undigestible. If it So there's these cornerstones of too much, too fast, too soon, or not enough. And so depending on the person's also resiliency, that can play a role into whether or not this is stored as trauma in the body or in the mind. And so, but there are times, there are times where a woman said no or said yes, and it was really a no. There's times when she said no, and there was forced, no consent, in like instances of rape. And also something I like to bring about are the times that we say no and it's a yes. Like we actually do desire something, or we really do want something. And when it's not forced consent or forced sexual trauma in those other two examples, each one of those experiences is breaking trust with our body. We're not listening to what our body actually desires and what our body actually wants. And so a lot of women, I find, have a really, there's like an energy kink in our ability to trust our bodies. And and also play in the bigger picture of like what happened when you were a child.
Mm.
Are you really intuitive, but people tell you that you're don't believe in intuition, or you didn't say you were an intuitive child. I was a very intuitive child, but it wasn't fostered. So I shut it down. That's some of that people pleasing. It wasn't acceptable for me to kind of be very intuitive. And so to belong to my family, I shut that down and have had to recultivate that over the years. So I broke trust with myself in that way. And one, I think just starting to learn how to listen to the body is a great place to start. Most of us spend our days outside, like we're so outside of our body. And just starting to understand, like, what does that even mean? Like, what does that mean to be in my body? Well, can you start to pay attention to those internal sensations? Can you start to pay attention and recognize your breath or your heart rate and what's it doing at different times throughout the day? Like, that's honestly the very, very beginning, is your ability to just tune in and just be present with that and actually feel it. Because there's a lot of people that don't have the ability to recognize their internal sensations. So that's one of the first ways to start to cultivate trust. Um, and then honestly, one of the best practices I love for women to do, and where I start a lot of my clients, is go into a quiet place, put your phone away, set up an altar space maybe, or light some candles, like just really make it a really comfortable environment. Maybe have some different scents. Maybe you need to turn on gentle music, whatever it is, like that just makes your body really comfortable. And then just place your hands on your yoni, like, and just see what comes up. And there's no demand for penetration. There's no demand for anything. Like, it's pure, honest curiosity of like, I'm just going to sit here with my hands here and see, like, do stories come up? Do memories come up? Am I judging? Am I shaming myself for just like having my hands here? Is there a story of like, I need to quickly orgasm? Like, I can't just lay here and create peace with my hands here. Um, and just inviting the body, or do you leave your body with your hands here? Like, inviting yourself just to be in that space with no attachment to any outcome, or just like, I'm just going to be here, just like you would with a friend. Like, I'm just going to sit here and invite whatever to come up to come up. And I love that activity for women to just start their journey. Just start to be curious and see what's there.
That's a beautiful practice. And that's one I've been doing as well. And what is funny, or I think funny is the right word. What I noticed when I first started doing that is I had to make it a practice. I had to put time and effort and thought into like, okay, let me do this. Let me take some time with my yoni and sitting here in peace. And it's a kind of a stereotype of our culture in Western society that like, how often are men doing that? That's like,
Mm.
right? That was like a Michael Jackson move of like touching your crotch and things like that for men, but not for women. It was
Yeah.
almost expected occasionally to see men do that in our society. And at least from my perspective, it was like a conscious, I'm taking time for this, need to commit to myself in this way, which was such like a almost like a mind fuck in a really weird way when I started.
Totally. And like, for me, it was all the stories of shame, because I grew up from a religious background, and like things like masturbation was considered bad, or sex before marriage was bad. And so for me, it was like, and think about, like, I love that you brought up Michael Jackson. He would touch himself, and it's like, oh, that's part of a dance. But if a woman does it, then she's like slutty, or she wants to have sex. Like, that it's an open invitation for a man to have sex with her. And it can't just be seen as like a dance move or a form of pleasure for herself. Like, it's so shamed in our society. And that's where some of that trust also gets broken, is like, as just this, like, well, I have a desire to touch myself. I have a desire to make time to go be by myself for a half an hour. But instead, I'm going to guilt and shame myself that I'm taking that quote unquote, that much time away from being productive or doing all these other things I should be doing rather than sitting with my desires.
Mm-hmm. And what's really coming up to me right now is this idea of embodying power, embodying your own power and confidence, along with this trust that we've been talking about. And I know some of your content talks about embodiment and this practice. Can you elaborate on that a little bit too, as far as, I don't know if benefits is the right word, but like maybe the benefits that can come from these practices?
Yeah. Oh, I think again, we've been conditioned to spend so much time outside of our body. And I love that you brought up the word power. That's actually the third gate. The third thing we explore in the womb gates is power. And a powerful woman is a dangerous woman. A woman that is in her sovereignty and listening to her body, like especially in the birth world, is a really dangerous woman as far as like patriarchal practices go and quote unquote medical practices go. And, you know, honestly, this practice still goes on is clitoral mutilation,
Mm.
where at birth, those practices still happen. And my understanding from speaking to someone personally who's experienced that as a child, the reason why that was done is because the culture didn't want the women feeling pleasure with their sex. So that, like, the reason why a woman is here is to have babies and produce, and heaven forbid that during that practice or during that time, even things like orgasmic birth don't even get to be an option, which, ugh. It's so just, it's a total takeaway of our power. And, you know, I'm not sure about your audience. I love that you've been reading into more womb work, into more um, like what all this means. To me, you hear this term, the feminine rising. What that really means is a woman stepping back into her sovereignty and a woman stepping back into her power. And that's really done through our pleasure. Like when we look at feminine energy, not the female, but feminine energy, we we're looking at things like flow, ease, surrender. Like it's very mystical, almost even dark. It's the darker, you know, gooey. Like these are all the yin and the yang. Like this is all the yin. It's like gooey. And with that comes this like desire. And part of that is that embodiment, like just being in our bodies. And I think part of the reason why we are conditioned to live outside of our body is we aren't conditioned to be in our pleasure. Again, we're shamed for it. And uh, it just brings such a sense of ease to our lives. Like really living your life with pleasure. I mean, you still have to quote unquote chop the wood and deliver the water, or whatever that saying is. Like get the water and chop the wood. Like we all have tasks we have to do. Like we have to put dinner on the table for our kids. You know, like there's certain things. But a lot of us completely avoid how we want to be actually living our lives and how we would spend our time if we would allow ourselves to have some of that sovereignty, some of that embodiment, and some of that pleasure. And when I started studying womb work and went through a almost year-long program, I completely changed my life because I started recognizing all the places where I was just doing what I was conditioned to do, showing up, quote unquote, more masculine energy, penetrative, forcing, working really hard, burning myself out. I was so burned out. And hence the nervous system pieces of like, that's just not a way to live our life. And when I started to really dive into more of the feminine energy with this pleasure piece, I stopped working so much. I started spending time in nature. I started to actually enjoy sex. Like sex got to be fun and pleasurable. It got to be something that I could like own, that I desire and want. Because again, that conditioning of religion, I wasn't here to do that. Um, yeah, just so many lifestyle changes from that.
Yeah, I really like how you brought up the feminine energy piece and how that's connected to pleasure and coming back to your body and power, and all these pieces are woven together, and it made me think of maybe another wound that I've been working through that I would love just your advice on is deservingness, and like needing to, like you said, needing to be in your masculine almost to like earn being in your feminine and being able to just enjoy and be and have that pleasure. But are you allowed to do that if you're not doing, performing, penetrating, achieving, all these terms that you used? What are your thoughts on that?
Wait, this is also, a big topic I'm sitting with right now. One, our society really pushes that self-worth is around achieving, around doing.
Oh yeah,
And
that runs deep for me.
me too. Me too. And, I first started unpacking this with the womb work and like stepping away from like so much forcing, so much like do, go, 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 go. And then now, over many years later, I am into this work. It's coming down to what I'm unpacking currently is like a white privilege piece. And I just kind of think for me, and when I look at other people that do a lot of trauma work, it's kind of the trajectory where we start with ourselves and we start unpacking like, what are our individual bodies holding? What do we need to move through and heal? What trauma resolution can occur? And then it's almost like when there's so much trauma in the body, you have tunnel vision. It's like just you and all you can handle in your own body. And then as you start to process things out of your body, the tunnel vision starts to open up and expand. And we start to say, oh, wait a minute, I'm in a family system. And so then we start to do our family work and our ancestral work. And that's really some of the role I know I'm here to do. And did a lot of deep family healing with family constellation work. That was a couple of years ago. And so then it's like my perspective was able to get a little wider of like, oh my God, I'm in a collective system. And a lot of the ways white Anglo-Saxon people are raised are to do, achieve, very singular, very like I. And so this is where I am now, is unpacking that piece. There's still a very masculine energy around that because, I mean, that's just how America was built, unfortunately. Like we got rid of the community. We got rid of the feminine. We got rid of the mother. And it was all focused on man. And not that this is like bad or good. It's just I'm to the point in my journey of like, wait a minute, I want to go back to community. I want to go back to the mother. I want to go back to the feminine. I want to go back to collectivism. I want to step away from so much I-ism. And so that's what I'm unpacking now is it's almost like the word that I've been sitting with the last couple of days is actually saviorism. Like, how much do I show up in my saviorism of like, I have to do it all myself. I have to make everything better myself. And again, it's that I masculine energy versus if I really drop into the feminine in a felt sense, my worth has nothing to do with how productive I am as an individual. Like, my worth is like, if I look at it from a communal perspective, is like, what can I offer to the community as a collective? And I have that space. I've had the ability to dive into these things because of privilege. Like, I've been able to do a lot of trauma work and a lot of collective healing and a lot of ancestral healing because I'm privileged. And I think it's really important to speak to that, to acknowledge that I am where I am today because of my privilege.
Yeah, I have thought about that more and more as I get farther on my own healing journey too. I'm glad you brought that up because I do some days I'll be like you said, you're sitting with this savior word. I'll have times like that where I'm sitting with the same question for a week or weeks. And sometimes it gets frustrating, right? If you aren't quote unquote having a breakthrough, which again is like so masculine, but I still will get frustrated sometimes if I'm sitting with the same question. And then I think, oh my God, like how fortunate am I to be stressed about like this question of personal development that I'm sitting with, of like trying to make my life and my business and the people around me, their lives better. And just taking time for that when other people are in different situations and they probably truly don't necessarily have the time for that. I'm really glad. Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. And doesn't that lead to the biggest breakthroughs too in itself when you think that and you're like, wait. It's almost like that air quotes first world problem type of thinking of I have
Totally.
so much. I have so much that I'm able to think about this right now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like, yeah, I do think about that a lot of like first world problems. And I have a tendency to make things really complex. Like, I just do. I have a complex mind. And so when I can just stop and be like, wait a minute, this is actually really simple. How can I make this more simple? Oh, I just need to drop into my body. I just need to stop and take a breath. The answer will come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, taking the
Oh,
pressure off.
yeah. It
Yeah.
always comes. It just doesn't come when we want it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's such a good note to kind of bring us full circle back. Because when I think of womb healing, when I first started hearing about it and listening to podcasts, I was like, listen, I don't know if I totally understand this, but just how you said, like, you can keep it simple, doing a meditation on your sacral chakra, for example, it can be so simple. And there are a million examples out there with those types of meditations. And that right there is embodiment practice. It's coming back to your senses. It is coming back to that specific space, that portal in our bodies. And you can really make it that simple. If you want to go on a huge womb healing journey, you can do that too. But coming back to like, how can I just make this simple and fit into my life? Like, oh my gosh, if that is not a beautiful wellness lesson, I don't know what is.
Yeah, right. I love that you speak to that. It's so true. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, where can the little moments add up? They
Yep.
really do. They really do.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit about nervous system and stress already, but I wanted to ask you some more questions to dig into that. And the first one being, you know, how could someone notice you mentioned kind of being outside of your body and also these nervous system dysregulated states. How can someone really notice that if they're like, I'm not sure, like should I focus on this, or maybe like symptoms is a better word too. What would be some symptoms of that?
Mm, I mean, nervous system is such a big catch-all phrase almost. Um, because it really is, it's a whole system in our body that runs all the other systems. It runs our organs, it runs our hormones, it runs our endocrine system, it runs our brain. So, if you're really fried, like if you really have pushed your nervous system, you could have cycle issues actually. Your period could have problems. You could be brain foggy, just tired all the time. You could feel anxious. You could feel anxious all the time. Even your blood work, like if you're getting blood work, all of that could be off because if you have been in that state of go, 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 masculine, pushing yourself so hard, keep up with the Joneses, like, and your body's not made to do that, or if you do have a history of stress and trauma, or you have 1,000 things on your plate, your body's going to start shutting down. Really, it is. And unfortunately, there's a term called allocastic load. I hope I say that correctly. I've
Is it
never heard it.
allostatic?
Allostatic.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Where we actually don't pay attention to our state. And so our body has to get louder and louder and louder until we finally listen. And by time we finally listen, like we're past the point of like a quick fix or like I just need to take a weekend vacation and be fine. Like we've pushed beyond that. Um, so just really noticing like what is the health of your body? That's the
Mm.
best nervous system indicator. And I talk about like kind of a roadmap. And if you've never tuned into your body or don't know the state of your body, I ask people to set a timer a couple times throughout the day. And when the bell goes off or the timer, it's your opportunity to check in and be like, what's my heart rate doing right now? What's my belly doing? How's my breath? How are my thoughts? Like, is my mind racing or am I completely numbed out? Because that's kind of the two extreme ends of the spectrum is like numbed out, disassociated, thoughts going 1,000 miles an hour. And so tuning into your body and just being like, what's going on right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just bringing awareness to that can be huge.
And I would add just based on clients that I've worked with and kind of the theme of this podcast of reconnecting mind and body and holistic health, some symptoms that I would say can kind of also point to that it would be helpful to do some time doing womb healing or even just embodiment practices would be a lot of, like we talked about at the beginning with the yoni work. If you already feel distrust or like you don't know what a yes or no feels, or there is like maybe a sticking point with something in your health, like you brought up, that you're like, I don't know where this came from, even like pains, right? Like bodily pains, bodily aches, that you're like,
Mhm.
this just popped up, I don't know what's going on. That can be physical, of course. It could be like a legit traumatic injury that you need to see a Western medical practitioner, but there are a lot of times it's also energetic, if not 100% energetic. So those can be good like red flags as well. Would you agree?
Totally agree. And like, even just the way that's the other piece I speak to with clients that are just starting out this work is like, how are you standing?
Mm,
Because the way we stand affects our diaphragm and it affects our what's called the SA node of the heart. It affects your vagus nerve. And so certain ways of your standing or your posture can literally change how your nervous system is communicating to your brain and your body. And a lot of the ways we stand are energetic. Like it's just this crazy conditioning. It's this pattern that started as a child because story happened or something happened, and then we stay that, like, we kind of stay in that pattern. And so even starting to look at those pieces with, and then, as you get older, you're like, oh, my hip is jacked. Why is my hip jacked? Oh, because I constantly stand with my leg out or this leg bent or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's such a good reminder. And that is also totally linked to confidence and power, right? Like, I've actually really been working on that. And I think of I'm just tend towards slouchy because I'm pretty tall as a female. And so I've been thinking like up through my crown chakra and
Mm,
thinking about that from a structural, like skeletal perspective, but also through my chakras and through my energy center, and like how can I stand taller and feel more connected through the energy centers of my body. And it has felt really good. I mean, it's been several months now that I've been really focused on that, and I have noticed my physical body feeling better, but also my emotional body. So
mm.
I did just want to highlight that because I think that plays a role in emotions and energetics, but then also literally how your body is feeling and moving and operating.
Totally. I stood for years with my right leg kind of externally rotated, with
Mm.
my left toes still pointed forward. I even found a picture when my dad was moving, and I was probably 12 or 10, and I was standing that way in the photo. So it's like this chronic habit that started when I was a child. And I have so much right hip tightness. I feel like my uterus slightly is pulled to that right side because of that chronic standing condition. And it's taken years where when I just started out when I was like brushing my teeth or washing the dishes, I would look down at my feet and ever so gently be like, okay, right foot, toes forward.
Yeah.
And it literally changed. Like my pelvis structure is still changing from the last 2 years of me fixing that subtle, subtle piece of, yeah, I'm in a space right now where my whole hip structures are just like everything is shifting.
Mm. Yeah.
Wild.
Good for
And then how
you.
that
Yeah.
evolves. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I know it's one of those things again that like it really does take your conscious attention for at least a little while. Yeah.
Mhm.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Like we are worth it. We are worth those small moments that lead to big changes over time, right?
Totally. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing all of your expertise and all of these tips. Is there anything else you would like to add, like little tools or resources that women listening could really dive into and take hold of?
Um, you know, I know that people probably hear this all the time, but honestly, if you're not spending at least 5 minutes a day just sitting with yourself in a quiet space, paying attention to your breath, like, please start. The world needs you to start.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just give yourself that opportunity, and that's the easiest place to start. I think most people think, like, they have to have a really huge hour-long practice, whether it's yoga or breath work or just sitting, paying attention to the birds singing outside, like, even 5 minutes a day is such a great place to start. So I always like to remind women of that. And I also like to remind women that we have a tendency to not seek help. There's actually a birth statistic right now since COVID hit where um, the stress and anxiety from a woman having a baby during COVID is up like 30%. And we also have one of the worst birth rates in the world here in America. So go figure. Um, but that has increased, and it's estimated that 50% of the women don't seek out resources at all. They just they feel like there's something about like either we're not worth it or like we don't deserve the help or like we need to do it alone. But honestly, whatever it is, please, you're worth the support. You are fully deserving of getting the resources and the help you need, whatever that is, whether it's like pelvic floor therapy or working with a coach or working with a trainer or womb work or ancestral healing, like whatever it is, you, every woman is so worth it. And with the feminine rising, this world isn't going to change until we really fully own like how amazing we are. And we do return back to the space of the quote unquote mother and start to focus our resources on the feminine. So that's the other thing I like to remind you is please seek out help and services if you need it. And just I think the last thing is like I also like to remind women like we aren't projects to be fixed. I think that's the other way we approach health is like I'm gonna fix this and I'm gonna do and we bring the masculine energy to it. And like you're already healed. That's what I love about body work. And that's the basis of cranial sacral therapy is that we, our bodies want health. We want to be in movement. We have babies, we're here to give life. We're life force energy. And our bodies know how to do that and desire that. And so just tuning into the part of you that's already healed and already knows how to heal. Our bodies know how to heal. And so tapping into that part that is within you. It might feel really deep down in there for some of us, but it's there. It's totally there. So we're not here to be fixed.
I
I think
love that you brought that up. Yeah, I talk about that a lot because especially in the nutrition space and with diet and disordered eating and all these things, it's like, I just need to fix this. I just don't want to be like this anymore. And it's like, those are just any of those, what we would call negative symptoms popping up. Those are just signals from your body saying, hey, I need you to pay attention to this. It's just a red flag from your body to your mind. And that any practice that you do that is reconnecting, like you said, simple breathing for 5 minutes, simple check-in. I just sent a 4-part, easy, like 4-question self-check-in you could do every day to my email list. If you're not on that, definitely get on it. There are all these easy practices that can help us remember that we are our own healer, that our bodies want to be in that state of health. So thank you for that reminder too.
Yeah. And I love the way you speak to that of like, yeah, it's if something's going on, it's because your body wants to heal and wants you to give it attention.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it
Exactly.
is. It's not that you're broken or that like, yeah, or that you're failing, it's your body being like, yoo-hoo.
Hello. Yes,
Oh.
exactly. Exactly. Oh, amazing. Yes. Thank you for that. And thank you again for all your expertise today. Where can people connect with you, find you, learn more?
I think, I think the best is I do have a newsletter. I'm just going to be honest, you're lucky if you get an email or two from me a month.
That's how mine
But
is. I know. I'm like, I'll send one if I'm really fired up. But then they're
totally,
always better. Whatever. They're like way better.
totally. I so agree. I mean, I'm very feminine with my newsletters. It's like
Yep.
when the creative channel comes through and that portal of my creativity opens, then I send a newsletter and it's really usually really good. So but you can find my newsletter and sign up for that on my website, which is my name, leshanelson.com. And I'm way more active on Instagram. Then that's the best social media platform, as well as I just started a podcast. I think I'm like 7 episodes in. I also run my podcast like my newsletter. When the spark comes through, I release release a podcast, but that's called Nurturing Resilience. And actually, it's a different way of doing a podcast. I interview people and their stories of trauma and how they came through them. It's really more of a storytelling platform, knowing that people heal when they share their story. So it's a space for that. So I always invite people like, please come share your story with me if you have something to share, something unique. So those are the different ways to connect with me.
I'll have to check that out. That sounds amazing. Yeah, and this was great. I feel like I learned a lot, and I'm really excited to bring this to our audience. So if you're listening and you liked this, please share it to your story and tag Lesha and I on Instagram and leave a review if you like this kind of podcast and you want to know more about this specific topic or a different topic. Leave a review. I love reading those, and I appreciate them so much. So thank you all for listening today, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.